Hi. Hello, everyone. Today is March 12th, 2021, and this is the monthly Longhorn community meeting. And for today, we'll give you an update on the latest Longhorn, the upcoming Longhorn release, as well as a new feature we have added in the Longhorn 1.1.1. And after have office hours, and you can ask whatever questions you have with Longhorn, and we'll try our best to answer. All right. So the upcoming Longhorn release will be Longhorn 1.1.1, and it was scheduled to be released by later this month, but due to some unforeseen reasons, and we are rescheduled it to be released by the April 2nd. And for the RC1 release, and the formal release will be at April 15th. So for this. For 1.1.1, our major focus is on the stabilized Longhorn data path, as well as adding a few more new features to support KubeVirt and other use cases. And one of the features I want to mention is we have added enhanced resource reservation mechanism. And in the past, so first, Longhorn is infrastructure storage. So you need to normally you need to guarantee that your storage layers are working fine, and because it's provided storage to your workload running in your cluster. So as our storage software, we do have a certain amount of resource requirement, and in the past we are trying to avoid the CPU starvation for the Longhorn. So there's one parameter called guaranteed engine CPU setting, which you can find from here. So this was the setting where, so what you are looking right now is the document for the upcoming 1.1.1 release. And we decide to deprecate this previous setting and replace that with two new settings. So the problem with guaranteed engine CPU is that we were set. So basically, it's using to allocate certain amount of CPU resources to your instance managers, to the Longhorn instance manager who is running on the Longhorn engine and replica process, which is basically the data plan we have in Longhorn. But the problem is the guaranteed engine CPU normally only going to allow you to set a number, and by default is going to be a quarter of one CPU, and that doesn't really work if you have more. If you say you have a one dedicated node only running on the replicas, but doesn't really running like any engines, right? So because for the Longhorn perspective, the engine instance manager and the replica instance manager are in fact two different parts. So, and also if you have some nodes with more CPUs and some nodes with less CPUs, and this doesn't really help if you like have the same value for all of your clusters, but for all of your cluster nodes, even without different amount of CPUs. So in the new release, in the upcoming 1.1.1, what we are introducing are two new parameters. One is called guaranteed engine manager CPU. Another one is called guaranteed replica manager CPU. So those two are directly mapping towards the reservation we are planning for the engine instance manager and replica instance manager on your node, who is running the data path, the data plane of Longhorn. And also we changed the number to be from a certain number, like a quarter of one CPU, to a percentage. So those global options will going to automatically reserve a certain amount of CPU, and by default, it's going to be 12% of your the CPU you have on the one node to the engine manager, and the 12% for the certain number of your for the number of your CPUs on the node for the replica manager as well. So if you only using if you don't use the replica on certain nodes, and then you don't need to have this replica manager CPU part, and so on. So, but the reason you can see that now we are in fact reserved more than what we have asked before, which is 0.25 of one CPU in many cases. The reason is we do see a lot of users complaining about like have the replica disconnected even with SSD and 10G networking. And most of the time it's due to like the Longhorn process are suffered from lack of resources, especially if you have the enough like SSD, enough speed for the IOPS, which means you are using SSD and using like 10 GB network between the nodes, then CPU is the next bottleneck we might have. So by increasing the reserved CPU to about like a quarter, so basically now adding up the engine manager and the instance and the replica manager CPU reservation, Longhorn is now by default reserve about a quarter of your total CPU numbers to guarantee the stability of the Longhorn instance manager. So your volume should suffer from should have enough room to work in the most cases. So this is the one thing we have added and in fact enhanced in this release. And also currently we're suggesting to have the thing is there is the limitation on the Kubernetes, which makes it hard for us to adjust this guaranteed engine CPU or guaranteed like request CPU, in fact, in the Kubernetes pod spec dynamically. It just doesn't allow you to change it after you set it. And in order to reset it, you have to like restart the instance manager pod in order for the new the new value to take effect. So but that will of course result in all of your volume to be disconnected because the process will be killed and restarted. So that's why we do recommend to at least leave those parameters at the default level. And then we at least have for the if you don't have like just extremely large number of the engines, for example, you can see that by the calculation right now, if you for example, we have if you have about 8 CPUs in one node, and for the engine manager, we're going to receive about 1 core, which is good enough for at least 10 engines running on that. By the way, this calculation here for the guaranteed engine manager CPU is pretty conservative, so you probably can get away with as many of like 2 times the number there, but the CPU consumption is in fact going to be higher if you have like more engines running on the node, of course, and also if you have more replicas running on the nodes as well. All right, so that's the one thing I want to call out for this release. And also, there's another thing we have saw before, and in fact, this wasn't really called to my attention before, but in fact, we do realize that we saw it pretty often those days, because that when you upgrade in the Longhorn 1.1 release, we have updated our UI routing. So that means is after you upgrade from other previous release to the 1.1 release, if you are still using the bookmarked URL you are using before, and that URL in fact won't work. So what you need to do is in fact very simple. You just need to let me see. Yes. So you just need to like close your current URL and reopen it from the Longhorn if you are using Rancher. Yeah, in fact, this one is more severe with Rancher. If you're using Rancher and in the Longhorn as a Longhorn app, and you can just re-click and the Rancher entry point for the Longhorn UI and save that URL, and that should work. But in fact, we decided to not add this to the release note because it seems pretty trivial. Say if you cannot get the UI working and you should like try it again, like from the source, and that should solve it. But in the end, we realized that is really a blind spot in our release cycle. We don't realize that how big the impact of this. At least we have heard about like at least 10 users that got confused and see why the Longhorn UI no longer work. So if you have encountered a similar scenario, you can just go to the Longhorn app and click the URL to open the Longhorn UI again and save that URL as the new one. That's definitely going to work. So that's and also we are working on adding a knowledge-based article. Yeah, I think the article is almost there. Yes, we're going to add a knowledge-based article to have this information documented. So in case you are wondering about the knowledge-based article, and it's all located here. So those are a few things we have seen in the field and got a response from the user. And if you see troubles like this, you can refer to the knowledge-based article to get more insight. And we're adding more articles regarding the common issue we see when using the Longhorn. All right. So the last update is we are going, in fact, for starting the next month, I have introduced another team member, David Cole, and he will start helping with the Longhorn community meeting and host the meeting and some other open source community stuff. So I will also introduce him in the next meeting at the next meeting. And hope everyone will, and I hope everyone will support him as you support me. And let's build this Longhorn community meeting and Longhorn community better and better. All right, so that's all update from my side. Anybody has any questions? All right, so thanks everyone, and I will stay for the office hour, and I will stop recording now. And thanks everyone for joining. Have a good day.